Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Progress webinar, Making ROI Real, Proving the Value of Data and Knowledge Management Investments. I'm Hinal Patel from the Progress Product Marketing team, and I'll be your host today. Today's session is focused on one of the biggest challenges facing organizations today, not just implementing data and knowledge management strategies, but clearly demonstrating their business value and ROI. We're joined by Gerard Rebalsky, Senior Strategic Account Executive here at Progress, who has extensive experience helping enterprises quantify the impact of their data and semantic investments. And before we get started, again, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Gerard Rebalsky, bringing years of experience partnering with organizations across industries to help them connect data-driven initiatives to measurable outcomes. Gerard will walk through practical approaches and real-world examples of how to position and measure the ROI of knowledge and data management investments, making the case for why these programs are critical to long-term success. With that, I'll hand it over to Gerard to kick things off.
Thank you, everybody, for joining again. If you tuned in last week, today we, as Hinal mentioned, we're talking about the art of the possible, how to determine ROI for Progress software. But actually, these upcoming slides in the presentation here can really be utilized for really any technology out there. Before we get into the slides, I want to just explain that the following slides are really like a guideline. It's just to offer some inspiration, some ideas on how you could derive value, whether it's focused on the Progress Semaphore platform, MarkLogic, or the Progress data platform. But we're going to hit just in general knowledge management, information management, and data management ROI ideas that you can utilize across the organization. So I hope you find that helpful. I always like to start these conversations with this quote from George Bernard Shaw, where the single biggest problem in communications is the illusion that it has taken place. We've all had conversations with our friends, our families, our colleagues, just people in public where you're feeling like you've just articulated the solve for a problem or an idea or something that you want to do or have done. And meanwhile, the person that you're speaking with walks away and they have no clue what you just talked about, or they have a completely different perspective on what you were trying to articulate. So people kind of, don't realize like this is a massive issue, just in the world today and in history, right? We talk about something, we think it's clearly articulated, but we're surprised when the audience, the target, that we're explaining that idea to, completely just doesn't understand. And we think, well, gosh, they're so dumb or ignorant or whatever, right? But it's really, the problem is that a lot of times you just didn't articulate it in the context of what your audience is expecting or what they need to hear and what's valuable to them. So George Bernard Shaw, I don't know when this quote came from, how long ago it was, but just by his picture, and if you know his history, it was a while ago, it still stands true today, not surprisingly. And so, as I said, this is more, the following slides that we're going to go through today. This actually should be a pretty quick webinar. I usually, just at least in the practice runs, got through this in about 20-25 minutes. Could be less today. But it's part 3 of what started as just, a standalone how to secure stakeholder buy-in, where we explored the fundamentals of building a persuasive business case and really how to take that sort of tech speak and translate it into business speak so that you're more likely to get stakeholder buy-in for whether it's a technology, added FTE, or a new process that you want to get in place. Part 2, we actually put this in action using a real world example from a conversation with then Nike's principal taxonomist, Aaron Leonard, and that helped bring the concepts from part 1 to life through the real world enterprise perspective. So highly suggest you click into those, take a listen, and look at the content, and then that really is sort of taking us here now to part 3. And I want to just start, as I did with the other 2 webinars, is what is business value? Well, Harvard Business Review defines it as The value is the worth in monetary terms of the technical, economic, service, and social benefits a customer company receives in exchange for the price that it pays for a market offering. So, and really, you really need to know what your business values, right? What is it driving? And you always want to tie it directly to what it needs. This is something that we go into more detail in the previous webinars, but in essence, and I'll thank my colleague Lance who articulated this succinctly, but if it doesn't increase revenue, it doesn't secure the business, or it doesn't save the business money, it doesn't necessarily really provide business value. There's exceptions, of course, but again, what is your business's drivers? What does it say on the website? What is your CEO saying on earnings calls? What is your CRO saying in interviews, for example? Those things you would really want to hone into. Typically, today probably every earnings call is like, we're really driving into AI, right? So how do you add value to those AI drivers? How are you going to make AI successful for the business, as an example? Just some precursors. There's a lot of ways of getting buy-in. There's organizations like KPMG, McKinsey, Gartner that I'm an alum from, and where I learned a lot of this from. Harvard Business Review. There's a lot of strategies. You might have a strategy. If what you're doing today isn't broken, you're getting that buy-in, don't fix it. But think of this as just adding a different or another additional layer on the importance of what you're trying to get buy-in for. Of course, every organization has their own internal political issues or processes. Your business is no different. But again, you can change the way people think simply by applying alternative insights that they may not have considered before. Also, you always want to intersperse data, not just ROI. So it's always great to use, whether it's a Gartner data, a Magic Quadrant, or one of my favorite advisory firms, Infotech, one of their data quadrants. That I'll just note that Semaphore is a 5-time champion of that. So definitely give a look for the Infotech data quadrant on metadata management. But in general, just you want to put out general data points, such as if you're trying to drive metadata management, you want to point out that the market, 80% of firms are prioritizing metadata management and AI in their data strategies, right? Or 46% of employees say productivity would improve significantly if knowledge flowed more freely. These are great data points to intersperse in, whether it's your presentation or your talk track, as you're talking to your business stakeholders. So just some examples there that you can use, but do your own research, see what else you can find that would be more specific to your endeavors. So, a lot of what I hear, and kind of what really inspired me when I came to Smart Logic, which is now Progress Semaphore, is that because we're looked at as middleware. I'll get into that in just a moment. But our customers are saying, like, well, Gerard, we really don't own the ROI of the search engine, or we don't own the ROI of the, our instance of SharePoint, or we don't own the ROI of our ERP platform. We just plug Semaphore in, and Semaphore does a lot, but people don't see it. But we don't get to really articulate, the value, because we're just like a small piece of the puzzle. So I put together a little illustration here, right? As I just mentioned, customers are always telling me, like, well, we don't own the ROI. Nobody understands, what, X, or in this case, say Semaphore is and what it does. We're just that small piece of the technology puzzle. But when you think about technology, right, and in this case, our customers, our prospects saying, we're just a small piece of the technology, right? But let's pretend that your larger technology is a car, right? So we designed this beautiful, nice little red car. And the mission of that top technology is to drive from Los Angeles to New York, right? The car itself isn't just the one piece of technology. it's actually made up of thousands of pieces of technology, whether it's the antenna, the headlight, the windshield wiper, the doorknob, the radio dial. They all have an effect, right? If you don't have the antenna, you can't listen to the radio. If you don't have if you have the antenna but not the radio knob, you can't listen to the radio. So that's going to decrease your customer satisfaction rate. It's not going to be as an enjoyable of a ride. If you can't open you can't use the doorknob, you can't get into the car, right? So there goes your travel plans. Though fortunately this one's a convertible, so you could conceivably jump over the top of the car. But let's even focus even smaller, right? You have your tire, that's a big piece, but what about the air intake valve? And even further, what about the cap that goes on that air intake valve? If you don't have that cap on that air intake valve, you're going to lose air pressure in that tire. That's going to cost the mission more money because you're going to have to refuel more often. But even more importantly, not having that air intake valve is going to cause a lack of tire pressure, and it's going to cause a risk where that tire may pop and you crash and you wreck the entire project. So don't think of just because you're that, metaphorical air intake valve cap, you're not a small piece of the puzzle. That piece can actually, without it, destroy the entire mission. So be proud that you own that piece of technology, and that technology contributes to the performance of the larger system, in this case, the car, because without that little piece, you're putting the whole risk, the whole mission at risk. With that piece, you're adding value. So you own the value as much as any other piece of that technology, in this case, the car, but it might be your search engine, again, your ERP system, whatever you're connecting your technology, your middleware technology to the bigger picture. So I hope that was a fun little sort of example of why all technology is important if it's the right fit in that technology ecosystem, and what the benefit to the business actually is. So I'm going to start just because, we kind of mentioned Semaphore, and, we're kind of calling it middleware. Semaphore actually is a standalone platform. It's a great taxonomy and ontology management tool, but, it does much more that once you connect it to another system. So in context of the Progress Semaphore, Progress MarkLogic, Progress Data Platform, it is the middleware piece. It's that semantic knowledge layer, which is actually more appropriate versus middleware. But Semaphore provides meaning, structure, and governance for knowledge and content. It's really the intelligence layer that ingrains trust in your AI. MarkLogic would act as the operational data layer. It's secure, scalable, it's ACID compliant, it's an ACID compliant unified data store for critical operations. It's trusted, governed data foundation. It does much more than that, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll leave it there. And then the Progress Data Platform is your data platform and AI delivery layer. It connects, it deploys, and it operationalizes trusted data and models. It's the trust and control layer for AI deployment. Now, the Progress Data Platform utilizes both Semaphore and MarkLogic. It may also, depending on your needs, incorporate other Progress technologies like Corticon or Nuclea or other of the many products that Progress produces, but just sort of wanted to lay a framework. So in general, if you're working with a middleware type technology, something that needs to connect, and I know the audience is made mostly up of information, knowledge, and data professionals. So I just wanted to add this slide in to give you a little bit of context and better understanding of the slides that'll be coming up. And so I also wanted to provide a business value chain of middleware. So you'll see on the left, we start with the business unit, the typical primary initiative supported, that's not exclusive. There's hundreds of others that could be applied to this, of course, and how a data, knowledge, or information management system like this could add value. the quote unquote middleware contribution, which is Semaphore in this case. But we're outlining, assuming in this column that you have Semaphore and how MarkLogic and or the PDP, as we call it, the Progress Data Platform, would support that value. And again, as we'll get into, is absent that technology, or if you remove that technology from, say, again, that proverbial collar that we talked about in the previous slides, what's the impact of that? And that sort of risk layer is really important, probably the most important of the tables that I'll be showing you moving forward. And here's just a second example with more examples from legal compliance to analytics to corporate strategy and leadership that you could apply this to. So there's 4 segments coming up here. We're going to start with just general knowledge, information, and data management equations. And then we're just going to move into Semaphore, then to MarkLogic, and then to the Progress Data Platform. And again, this is a guide, so I'm not going to go through each one of these equations. What I'm also going to tell you is that I've had a lot of success working with my prospects and customers in the past and currently get business buy-in by utilizing these types of examples. Now they've usually sort of manipulated them into their own, areas that they're trying to drive value with. So, keep that in mind. But I'm going to invite you, if you have questions about this webinar, to reach out to me directly or get in touch with your Progress account executive, have them, connect me with you. Or I can have a conversation with them in the background, and then they can present and help you do this custom output for yourself. It's actually really easy as you use your, like your AI chatbots and things like Copilot or ChatGPT, Grok, Google Gemini. Those systems are actually really great at summarizing and putting these things together. I've been doing this for years without help of those, but since those have come out, I started using them over 2, maybe 3 years ago. I kind of forget when, but as those have evolved, they've really helped me create, an easier, more understandable way of implementing these following slides. So I hope you see the value in them as well. But starting with, just a general enterprise ROI framework for KM, IM, DM, which is knowledge, information, data management, business drivers. We have 2 slides in each section, just giving you some standard business drivers or use cases. Next column from the left is, the KPI, key performance indicator, what's actually measured, how value is realized, an ROI formula that you can use to actually calculate return on investment, and typically the financial impact category. So cost savings, productivity, risk avoidance, revenue growth. So here's part 1, and then another slide with more examples there. I literally, as we were trying to do this last week, I had probably like 24 examples for each one. I just wanted to make it a little bit more easily readable, but there's literally dozens to hundreds of examples that you could do. Again, happy to help you with that, but utilize those, AI chatbots, AI assistants that you probably have in your organization to see if it can, help you articulate and determine what those would look like yourself. And then part 3, this is what I was mentioning is the most important. I learned at Gartner working with Paul Proctor and Michael Smith and being on hundreds of calls around security and risk management, right? Our customers were chief information security officers, and what they had a tough time, and at this time, I'm going back to like 2008, was there would be a breach, and the simple solution for the business would be like, well, you're the chief information security officer. See you later. You're fired, right? And the business would be like, okay, we solved the problem. However, what Paul and Michael came up with was key risk indicators, right? I don't think they came up with that necessarily, but the importance of key risk indicators, right? And showing that the business actually owned the risk of a lack of security, right? So you have a breach, you can fire the chief information security officer and say problem solved, but you lost revenue, you lost customer trust, you lost, you're getting fined due to regulatory infractions, compliance infractions, the business owns the risk. So much like that example, you can apply this to any technology. This is the risk that we face if we don't incorporate this type of technology in our, AI drivers, or in our efforts to improve regulatory compliance, or to improve our decision making, et cetera. So again, what's the KPI that's measured? To the KRI, I got to fix that. That's measured, how value is reduced, the risk cost formula, and the negative financial impact category on the right. This is really important, and we drive into this in a much more deeper capacity in part 1 of this series, and a little bit more in part 2 with Aaron. So it's just to give you some ideas, get your head wrapped around that it's not just about the performance that a technology is going to give, it's the risk that you're taking on if you don't utilize that technology. And that just sort of screams at stakeholders like, you really need this. So I just want to emphasize these slides in each of the following 3 segments as well. So from here, we're moving on to the Semaphore solution, ROI equations. Same model here, right? You got the business driver, the use case on the left, the KPI that's measured, how value is realized, the formula, and the potential financial impact category. There's example number, additional examples here. Again, with Semaphore, we can contribute to hundreds of different use cases in the organization. I was just talking a couple of weeks ago to one of our customers. And we had one of my MarkLogic peers on the call, and the MarkLogic peer was asking, well, what's the use case? And the customer was saying, well, there's literally 50 use cases, pick one. Gerard's already lined those up. Just pick one and drive into that, right? And certain technologies are always looking to drive that one use case, but at the end of the day, your technology is probably solving a lot of different use cases, and you can apply these findings, especially when it's sort of like a middleware type system like Semaphore that needs to connect to other systems. There's a lot of different use cases. So don't just think these are the only ones. There's a lot more out there. We can apply a specific one to you as you need it. And again, the risk of non-adoption or decommissioning a product like Semaphore, inaccurate regulated publishing, what's the number of publishing areas, what are the legal penalties, what's the workflow choke points, and the number of errors times issue remediation cost and enforcement probability, and then the negative financial impact is that compliance risk category. I'm sorry, we're going to go through again, MarkLogic ROI Framework. So we have the business drivers, securing data integration across silos, reduce legacy dependence, moving on, simplifying regulatory and security compliance, enabling new revenue services via APIs. What's the KRI or what's the KPI measured? How's that value realized? The ROI formula and the financial impact category. And again, what's the risk of non-adoption? What's the risk of decommissioning? This is really powerful here. There's just some suggestions on the left. It goes through those formulas all the way through to the right, and the negative financial impact category as well. And then finally, the progress data platform, which is, again, as a reminder, I spoke earlier that it typically combines Semaphore and MarkLogic as a solution, and depending on your needs, it might incorporate other progress platforms as well. So in this case, we want to unify data access and visibility. The KPI is, time to retrieve and blend that data, better insight velocity and less friction. The formula as to come up with the ROI, and the financial impact category. Again, we want to really emphasize, you're talking to the business, finance terms, that's the way you want to go if applicable. Another set of examples here. And then finally, again, really important, the risk of non-adoption or decommissioning, the negative financial impacts, cost, waste, revenue loss, strategic risk, compliance risk, very loudly speak to the business. So I've also included here just an appendix. There's a glossary of terms for you, formula, variable, legend. I also, just because I do manage Semaphore as a product currently, I went through and did a series on the actual modules for our Semaphore audience. So whether it's KMM, fact extraction, or semantic integration service, it gives you some ideas on how to measure the impact of that specific module. And of course, Semaphore is a modular platform. You can just have the KMM, the taxonomy management side, but you can also add in classification language services, fact extraction, and semantic integration services as well. And then you'll see in that part one, I think in part two as well, a little bit, Semaphore business ROI ideas. These are kind of just written more in layman's terms. That might be a little bit more easier for you to come up with that formula by seeing it in this context with the examples provided there. But it covers everything from support center search, information governance, going on to data protection, operational efficiencies, and then into AI, Gen AI, and RAG as well. And so again, the first time I did this with one of our customers, I showed them this slide and they were like, Gerard, this just like gave me 8 dozen ideas I could come up with now. It just, allowed them to see sort of like this, quote unquote formula and integrate it into his thought process and how he was going to articulate it, and it worked successfully for them to expand their Semaphore instance in that case. So with that, okay, it was 26 minutes, not too bad. I'm going to hand it back over to
Yes, thank you, Gerard, Thank you for taking us through the webinar. Before we dive into the Q&A portion, we'd like to share a QR code you can access to see what's new in Semaphore. There you'll find the latest release updates and product information. And if you've been using Semaphore and you have a few minutes, we'd greatly appreciate you sharing your experience. We're gathering reviews on 2 platforms and would truly value your perspective. Feel free to scan the QR code on the left for Infotech and the QR code on the right for Gartner. And now we'll move into the Q&A portion of today's session. Okay, I think we have our first one. In your experience, what's the most overlooked factor that impacts ROI in large-scale digital transformation or AI programs?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I think I missed that first part.
Yeah, in your experience, what's the most overlooked factor that impacts ROI in large-scale digital transformation or AI programs?
So it's a really good question. I would say the data, right? Your knowledge. And, a lot of companies, and I would say, I've seen statistics where, more than 50% of AI projects fail. And the reason that they fail, in my belief, and I think this is backed up by research as well, I don't have that off the top of my head, but Infotech and Gartner are great places to find that type of data. They fail because they don't, AI systems don't understand context. So when you don't have your knowledge management team, your information management team, your data management team involved, and you don't have a semantic layer so that helps those machines read content or understand context, right? And give that output. You have situations with, and I'm not knocking Google here, obviously, but when Google launched Gemini, they lost a lot of market value because when they first released it, just with any software, there's bugs, right? And sometimes you don't know what those bugs are until you release it to the public, and then there's always version X.1, right? It fixes the bugs, that next version of the release. But that cost them, a lot of market share, potential market revenue. And it's because those systems didn't really understand the context of the questions and the answer that it was, putting out there. So it just cost them a lot of trust, in this new AI initiative. So you had some maybe early adopters that, slowed the roll, so to speak. So it's really important to not just, launch these AI platforms, right? That's easy enough, but do those AI platforms understand the context that's being fed into it, and giving the output that is actually as a relevant, accurate, doesn't provide hallucinations, is it highly accurate output? So that's, I think that one thing most people overlook. They're just thinking, well, we can just shove all this data, the AI is going to figure it out. It can't classify content effectively. It can't understand context at all. It doesn't read like a human reads. It reads like a machine reads still at the end of the day. So that's why the Progress Data Platform in particular is great in helping customers with these AI initiatives get a highly accurate, trustworthy output from those systems, likely leading to more success.
Thanks, Gerard. Another question here. What are the biggest challenges organizations face when trying to quantify ROI from your AI or data-driven projects?
I would say it's in the case like with Semaphore, they're not deriving ROI, right? They're just, a lot of technologists, they talk about, and they'll argue with me too, like, Gerard, no, this business guy, or girl, they really want to understand the technology. And I always kind of push back, politely and just say, they want to understand the technology, but they want to understand it in terms of what's the output, what's the benefit to the business, what's tied to these drivers that our CEO, our CFO, our CMO, or CRO are driving, to improve business, to increase revenue, to secure data, to secure, to stay compliant. Those are the big, sort of umbrella drivers. But, if you're listening in, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, sorry, Yogesh, not listening into those earnings calls for maybe Progress, or I'll miss one and I'll catch up on it later. But I'm not, as an individual contributor, I'm not always listening to the bigger drivers, right? And fortunately, in my role today, it wasn't the case previously when I was, in more of a management leadership role. I don't need to tie, necessarily what I'm doing with a particular customer to our drivers. I need to figure out what their drivers are. A lot of customers are typically surprised when I, show them, the outputs that I do, in these sort of strategic presentations that I do for them. That I'll get often like, well, gee, Gerard, you know a lot more about our business than I do. I'm like, yes, I understand that, but that's why I'm showing what's important to your business. You need to tie, the fact that you want to bring in Semaphore to your business drivers. When you show the evidence, and again, we go through this in part 1 and part 2, quotes from your leadership that's saying, we're driving X, right? And you say, well, this supports X, you're much more likely to get buy-in. So it's really important to understand what is it that your business is driving, and that you're aligned and tied directly to that driver.
Thanks, Gerard. That's great. Another question we got in: any advice for when the business is reluctant to incorporate AI features?
Well, it's there's reasons for that, and probably good and valid reasons often. Gartner, we have these like hype cycles, right? And it's and I apologize, I haven't been at Gartner for 8 years, so I'm going to get spanked on this one. But it's like the peak of expectations, right? It's when technologies, these AI chatbots, these AI assistants, and everybody sees like, oh my God, this is the game changer. But then it falls into the trough of disillusionment, right? Doesn't mean that those technologies don't work and don't provide value. They just don't drive the perceived value that we thought. And that gets into that, the Google Gemini example where they lost a little bit of market share, but they've addressed that since the initial release with updated versions. And so then it starts to, head up to the, the slope of enlightenment or whatever it is. I'm turning red because I'm a little embarrassed that I forgot the nomenclature of those hype cycle reports, which are great. But the point is, it's sort of, there's a realistic expectation that comes into play, and that's where businesses start to slow down and say, whoa, let's really think about this. But that's what's great, about progress with, Semaphore, MarkLogic, Corticon, Nuclea, other products in the technology stack here that can help you achieve the ROI from your AI initiatives, because those systems are now going to understand the AI throughput, the information that's coming through, and produce more relevant, more accurate, less vulnerable to hallucination type responses that those AI systems alone would typically put out there. So focus on, hey, we understand, the maybe fear of not adopting. However, these technologies are going to increase the performance, increase the accuracy, reduce the potential of hallucinations by this much, right? And this is how we measured it, and this is the output that we got.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Gerard. The last question we have here are, what are some best practices for communicating the value of data or AI projects to non-technical stakeholders?
Speaking the value of business, right? So again, I think I mentioned, it's not about the buttons that you push, or, in the case of Semaphore, like preclusion or child and parent relationships and concepts. And it's really about what's the output giving you, right? So, you want to talk about in terms of, again, it's not how the technology works, it's what it produces, and what it produces that's going to benefit the business. So again, if going back in those slides, and this is again what we really drive into in part one of getting business buy-in webinar, is how to take that sort of technology speak and turn it into business speak, right? Which usually comes in financial terms, but it can come in others. But you want to speak to things like, hey, if we're forcing our customers that can't find things to call help desk, well, what does that do to our customer satisfaction scores, for example, right? It's going to decrease that. Customers are going to get frustrated. They're more likely to abandon their cart, right? And e-commerce, because they can't find the information they're looking for. They're going to come disgruntled. They're going to go to one of our competitors. Speak like that, right? This is affecting our customers. This is exposing us to risk, right? That's going to cost the business money. It's going to cost us fines because we're not compliant, right? We're falling out of regulatory statutes. It's going to open us for up to breaches. It's going to open up litigation, right? No company likes to hear anything about litigation, never speak of that, right? That's going to scream at them. It's going to make them sit up in their chair and take attention. Which, of course, many ways to articulate that. It's a really broad, question with a broad answer, but certainly, again, invite you to reach out to me and we can get into that in a little bit more detail, specific to your situation.
I think that wraps up our Q&A portion. If there's no more questions, thank you everyone for joining today. That will bring us to the end of our Making ROI Real, proving the value of data and knowledge management investments. A huge thank you to Gerard for joining us and sharing valuable insights and leading a thoughtful and engaging discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Progress team. We look forward to seeing you at our next Semaphore event. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.